I think we all know by now that Canon Films never met an international crisis that couldn't be solved by one American draped in denim, several machine guns, and a complete disregard for authority. For episode 5 in our Canon Film series, we're going all action. We have ninjas, commandos, terrorists, plenty of corrupt officials, illegal rescue missions, and enough practical explosions to make the entire video store shelf smell faintly metallic. So lace up the combat boots and tighten the headband. This is Canon Films No Bad Ideas, All Action Edition. What's up out there, guys? Welcome back to the channel. I'm Anthony DeJoya, and this is Sunset Video, where the tapes are worn in, the shelves are slightly chaotic, and the Canon Films action section is filled with over-the-top spectacle. In this episode, we're diving into 5 movies that I think purely capture Canon Films in full action movie mode. We have the movie that helped launch the 80s ninja craze, one of Chuck Norris's biggest rescue missions ever, a very dark Charles Bronson thriller, the birth of the American Ninja franchise, and an invasion of the United States that requires Chuck Norris to personally defend every shopping mall in America. Now, some of these movies were major childhood favorites, others were dependable cable watches, some the third tape you grabbed on a rent-to-get-one deal, or the safe pick when the new release wall had already been picked clean. And honestly, when looking back, those backup rentals were sometimes where the real magic happened. So let's kick this video off with Canon Films discovering that ninjas could be an entire cinematic business model all on their own.
Give him a message for me.
Yeah?
I don't like to be followed.
Alright guys, first up tonight is 1981's Enter the Ninja, directed by Menahem Golan himself and starring Franco Nero and Sho Kosugi. In this one, Nero plays Cole, an American veteran and newly trained ninja who apparently went to the Ninja 101 class at the Learning Annex. He's taken a road trip to the Philippines to visit an old military friend, and once there, he discovers that his friend is being pressured off his land by a wealthy businessman who wants the property for himself. So Cole decides to help, which naturally leads to organized crime, plenty of hired muscle, and a final battle against another highly trained ninja. Now, I'll be honest, I was never a huge fan of Enter the Ninja. The biggest obstacle for me was Franco Nero, who looked about as naturally suited to being a ninja as one of my uncles did. Nero's a strong screen presence, no doubt, but there's just something wonderfully canon about watching an Italian actor play an American ninja defending farmland in the Philippines. This movie is basically a Western wearing martial arts pajamas. You get a mysterious stranger arriving into a troubled community. He finds innocent people being bullied and decides to help clean up the town. So the structure is familiar, but the ninja imagery definitely gives it the kind of early 80s novelty that I think helped the movie stand out for sure. Christopher George is also solid in this movie. He understands the assignment as Venarius. He's wealthy, theatrical, and completely incapable of accepting the fact that someone might not want to sell him their property. And in this movie, he approaches real estate negotiations with the calm professionalism of a Bond villain on PCP. But the person who really jumps off the screen, to no surprise, is Sho Kosugi. Kosugi has the speed, precision, and just the physical credibility that Nero cannot match. I mean, even in a supporting role, Kosugi feels like the real martial arts star of the movie, and Canon would clearly notice because he'd return as the lead ninja in Revenge of the Ninja and become one of the defining faces in the studio's ninja cycle in the 80s. And I'll keep it real with you guys, despite my issues with this movie, I would still sit down and watch it whenever it turned up on cable, and that's sort of the strange power of a Canon Films movie. You may not love it, but once the ninja suits appear, changing the channel all of a sudden feels irresponsible. Now, there's no denying Enter the Ninja is clumsy, overly colorful, and occasionally slow, yet I think it remains historically important because Canon was still trying to figure out the formula, but the studio had found something audiences wanted, and once Canon found something that worked, the studio usually made 3 or 4 more of them before anybody could stop them. So with the growing ninja wave, Cannon had found a reliable source for action. However, they were about to find an even more dependable action formula just a few years later with the next movie on this list. You take Chuck Norris, you give him an unresolved military mission, place several governments in his way, and just sit back and quietly wait for diplomacy to leave the building. Next up is 1984's Missing in Action, directed by Joseph Zito and starring Chuck Norris as Colonel James Braddock, a Vietnam veteran who survived years as a prisoner of war, and when reports suggest that American soldiers are still being held captive, Braddock returns to Vietnam as part of an investigation. Now, the government wants meetings and negotiations. Braddock, though, in true 80s action movie fashion, has another plan, and I always enjoyed Missing in Action, partly because I think it sits right between a traditional war movie and the larger-than-life action movies that would take over the decade. I think that combination also made it very popular with my uncles. It had enough military hardware, plenty of jungle combat and battle history to feel like a war picture, but once Chuck Norris begins handling the mission himself, it becomes pure 80s action spectacle. Braddock, when looking back, really is one of those perfect Norris characters. He's quiet, haunted, already 10 steps ahead of everybody around him. He doesn't spend much time explaining what he's feeling because the beard is already handling most of the emotional exposition on its own. Now, the opening half gives the movie much more weight than I think its reputation would sometimes suggest. Braddock returns to the place where he was imprisoned, confronts officials who deny that American prisoners remain, and quickly realizes that this official investigation is largely ceremonial, so it's pretty heavy. And then Emmett Walsh arrives as Jack Tucker, and the movie really does shift gears. I think Walsh gives the movie some much needed personality, and his worn down humor gives Norris someone very lively to play against, and overall I think their duo is great for the needs of this movie. As for all the action, once Braddock launches the rescue mission, Zito really keeps things crisp and moving with skirmishes and boats and gunfire and explosions, and Norris emerging from the water with a machine gun in a moment that probably sold half of the VHS copies all by itself. Cannon Films fun fact, the first 2 Missing in Action movies were actually shot back to back, with the POW camp story originally intended to be released first. Cannon would, however, decide that the rescue film was more commercial and they would release it ahead of the other movie, and opted to turn the original opening chapter into Missing in Action 2: The Beginning as a prequel. And in retrospect, it was the right call, I think. Missing in Action would earn roughly $22.8 million in the States and really helped cement Norris as one of Cannon's most valuable assets. This was also one of those just dependable video store picks for me. When the new releases were already gone, I always knew that Missing in Action was waiting for me somewhere deep in the action section. This was also a dependable third selection for me back in the day during those rent 2 get 1 free deals, because I thought every rental night needed that third tape to seal the deal. So Missing in Action wasn't necessarily the movie that you would go to the video store to pick up, but it was a movie that you knew would deliver regardless once the pizza arrived. So Missing in Action gave Cannon Films a rescue mission with clear heroes, clear villains, and a satisfying destination, but you aren't going to want to check out yet, because our next rental, on the other hand, is nowhere near as direct, because we're leaving the battlefield behind and we're following Charles Bronson into one of the darker and more seedier corners of Cannon's action catalog.
It was Duke who put you out on the street. He made you turn tricks.
Duke was good to me.
Next up is 1989's Kinjite, Forbidden Subjects, directed by J. Lee Thompson and starring Charles Bronson as Lieutenant Crow, an LA detective investigating a criminal operation built around the exploitation of teenage girls. And when his case becomes connected to the disappearance of a powerful Japanese businessman's daughter, it's naturally going to pull Crow deeper into a violent and very disturbing underworld that few knew of. Now, I think Kinjite is an interesting film to discuss because the subject matter overall is much darker than the average Cannon Films action picture. This isn't Charles Bronson defending a neighborhood, chasing a colorful criminal, or setting crude traps for a group of street punks. The story deals with trafficking, assault, prejudice, and exploitation, and it handles those subjects with the blunt and sometimes uncomfortable approach of a traditional late 80s Bronson thriller. I never actually rented this one during its original video store life, but I remember always catching pieces of it during its cable rotation. It was like one of those movies that you had that you knew of more through scattered scenes here and there in passing than through the full story. But later into the 90s, I would finally watch it from beginning to end, and I enjoyed it despite its obvious flaws. Bronson's Crow is an angry, exhausted character. He's spent years looking at the ugliest parts of Los Angeles. In this case, pushes him beyond whatever patience he has left. And when looking back, I think Bronson was always effective at playing these conflicted character types, and once again, he does a great job here. The movie also tries to explore the cultural divide between Crow and Hiroshi Hata, the Japanese businessman whose daughter has been taken, and I will admit some of these ideas are interesting. However, the script also leans into a lot of stereotypes and attitudes that have aged poorly, so it makes this a movie that wants to criticize prejudice while occasionally getting tangled up in a bit of its own. And sure, that contradiction ends up keeping Kinjite from being as thoughtful as it wants to believe it is. Regardless, though, the movie has a cool, grim atmosphere, a strong Bronson performance, and the experienced hand of Thompson behind the camera. Thompson and Bronson had made several movies together, including 10 to Midnight, Murphy's Law, A Death Wish 4, and so on. This was actually their ninth and final collaboration, as well as Thompson's last feature film. And Kinjite may not be a traditional action crowd pleaser, but as a late period Bronson thriller, it has a grimy weight and more than enough nostalgic grit to entertain. Okay guys, I hope you're still sticking with me, because after that heavy-handed stop, I think we need to move back towards the brighter and more wonderfully ridiculous end of the Cannon Films action self. So bring back the headbands, dust off the throwing stars, and let's prepare ourselves for a movie that really did convince an entire generation of kids that ninjas were hiding behind every tree in the neighborhood.
Remember what is hidden deep in your mind.
Next up is 1985's American Ninja, directed by Sam Furstenberg and starring Michael Dudikoff and Steve James. In this one, Dudikoff plays Joe Armstrong, a quiet soldier stationed at an American military base in the Philippines. And when there's an attack on an army convoy, Armstrong suddenly reveals his expert command of ninjutsu, saves the commanding officer's daughter, and attracts the attention of an arms dealer operating his own private ninja army, because in 1985, every successful criminal organization needed a ninja division. Now, American Ninja was a routine watch for me. I loved ninjas as a kid. I planned on being one when I grew up if my MBA plans fell through, and I think this movie was and is the perfect combination of ninja flick and the type of oversized action spectacle of movies like Commando. It had martial arts, military action, explosions, secret compounds, corrupt officers, and enough ninja activity to make the backyard as a kid feel like an active combat zone. I remember wanting this movie on VHS for Christmas so bad, and that tape sadly never appeared under the tree. So I naturally did what any resourceful kid from the cable era would do. I bootlegged my own copy. Once it aired on HBO, my buddy's family's VCR did the rest of the work, and it may not have been the official release with the cool slipcover, but it was mine, and it received heavy rotation. Growing up, you could routinely find me watching it with my ninja pajamas on, surrounded by homemade throwing stars and cardboard tube swords, fully prepared to defend the house. As for the movie itself, I think Dudikoff works overall because Joe Armstrong is built around mystery. He barely speaks little about his past, and responds to danger with this mild annoyance of someone whose afternoon plans were disrupted, yet he's going to make the day work regardless. Dudikoff didn't have any formal martial arts training when he was cast, but Furstenberg and the stunt team would design the action around his athletic ability and his screen presence, and surprisingly enough, I think that approach worked out great. But I mean, really, I think the movie's real secret weapon is Steve James as Corporal Curtis 75 Cent Jackson. I think James brings charisma, humor, and genuine physical power. I mean, his early confrontation with Joe is one of the movie's best moments, and once they become friends, Dudikoff and James turn into one of Cannon's most enjoyable action teams. And then we get to Tadashi Yamashita, who crushes it as the Black Star Ninja, a villain armed with gadgets, weapons, and just the confidence of a man who feels like he bet the farm on his character not living until the end credits roll. He's totally over the top and perfect in his role as the heavy in this movie. Now, American Ninja was made for roughly $1 million, and it would earn around $10.5 million domestically. It would also be the launch of a 5-film franchise, and sure, it's not polished or even remotely realistic, but it's colorful, it's fast, it's sincere, and endlessly rewatchable whether you were a ninja-obsessed kid or not. Okay guys, I hope you're still with me, because by 1985, Cannon had delivered us ninjas, soldiers, secret compounds, corrupt officials, and enough franchise potential to really keep video shelves stocked for years. But our final movie decided that one military base was not large enough of a battlefield. This time, the entire country is under attack, and America's last line of defense is Chuck Norris in a Canadian tuxedo, sized extra medium.
America has not been invaded by a foreign enemy in nearly 200 years.
Our final movie in tonight's action lineup is 1985's Invasion U.S.A., directed by Joseph Zito and starring Chuck Norris as Matt Hunter, a former CIA operative living a quiet life in the Florida Everglades, but when those pesky Soviet terrorists launch a coordinated series of attacks against the United States, Hunter is pulled out of retirement to stop them all on his own. Now, I've loved Invasion USA since I was a kid. I know, big shocker there, right? This was just another dependable go-to movie for me when all the tapes I originally wanted to get were rented out, and that's not a slight against this movie at all. Invasion USA was always available, always turning up on cable, and it knew exactly what kind of movie it wanted to be. So going with Chuck Norris protecting America from international terrorists was a safe, satisfying choice for a big action movie night, even on repeat. This movie takes Cold War paranoia and really runs it through the full Cannon Films action assembly line. Terrorists infiltrate the country and they begin attacking suburban neighborhoods and churches and shopping centers and school buses and holiday gatherings. However, the goal is not simply military victory. Rostov, our Russian villain, wants to create fear and social collapse by making ordinary Americans believe that nowhere is safe, and I think this gives the movie a surprisingly nightmarish edge, even when the action becomes completely outrageous. Now, as for Norris, well, I mean, he's operating at maximum 1985 one-man army levels. Max Hunter lives in the Everglades, he wrestles gators, wears double denim, drives a pickup truck, and speaks only when silence has stopped being sufficiently threatening. Yet I would still say that Richard Lynch is equally as important as Rostov. He has the sharp, haunted look of someone who's been spending years losing a lot of sleep over Matt Hunter, which really does give our hero-villain duo some rich history. Rostov commands this entire terrorist army, but every time Hunter appears, he reacts like a ghost-wielding dual Uzis has just walked into the room. Now, as for the action, I think Zito stages the set pieces on a much larger scale than he did in Missing in Action. Houses explode, cars explode, boats explode, shopping malls explode. Even the air around Chuck Norris seems to have been soaked in gasoline, and the climactic battle inside the shopping center really, in looking back, it's pure Cannon spectacle, ending with Hunter and Rostov facing each other with rocket launchers because ordinary firearms would have been too subtle, so it's truly ridiculous in the most magical of action movie ways. The movie reportedly had a budget of around $12 million. It would earn approximately $17.5 million in the States, so it didn't really become the blockbuster that Cannon Films had hoped for, but it became one of the studio's most recognizable action titles through cable and home video alone. Naturally, critics tore it apart, and sure, the movie is unquestionably violent, it's excessive, paranoid, and sort of absolutely absurd, but it's also memorable, cinematically practical, energetic, and fully committed to its premise. So when the new release wall at the video store was empty, Invasion USA never felt like settling. And that wraps up episode 5 of our Cannon Films Shelf Dive, the all-action edition. We watched Franco Nero become an unlikely ninja. We sent Chuck Norris back into enemy territory. We followed Charles Bronson through one of his darkest investigations ever. joined Michael Dudikoff and Steve James for some prime ninja action, and then we watched Chuck return to personally save the entire United States, and to me, that's a healthy Canon Films marathon. These 5 movies also represent several different types of video store memories from back in the day. Some of these were movies you tracked down, some were homemade cable recordings, others were films you slowly discovered through late night television, and some of these were dependable backup rentals when the new releases were all checked out. Really, that was the beauty of the video store. You went in looking for one thing, wandered through the aisles, took a chance on something else, and occasionally came home with ninjas, Chuck Norris, and no regrets. Now, I want to kick it back to you guys. Let me know in the comments, which of these 5 movies would you have rented first back in the day? As always, guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me here today at Sunset Video. I really do hope that you enjoyed the video. If you did, drop it a like, join the conversation down in the comments. If you haven't done so yet, subscribe to the channel with your notifications turned on so you never miss a trip through the rental shelves. As always, guys, thank you so much for all of your support. I hope to see you all back for the next video. Until then, be kind, rewind, and remember, retro movies never say die.
Jack Burton in the Pork Chop Express, and I'm talking to whoever's listening out there.
Survive a war, you gotta become war.
I suppose we have to register you as a lethal weapon.
You trying to say Jesus Christ can't hit a curveball?